Mind your business. Mind your business. Mind your business. Mind your business.
For the people who are learning to mind their business.
Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 2 of Mind Your Business, sponsored by SR Homes, a builder focused on you. We are here today with Rodney Cook Jr. He's the president of the National Monuments Foundation. I'll get him to do a kind of description about what they do around the country in Atlanta. But specifically, I think it's important for everybody to know where y'all are headquartered and what y'all offer at your headquarters, which is the museum, and that's one of my favorite.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. We're based in the Millennium Gate Museum, which is this building right here, across from the 12 Hotel and the Atlantic Tower and Atlantic Station. 17th Street goes around our building in our park. And Atlanta has called herself the gateway to the South for 175 years. We just never had a gate. And so in my business, you tend to want to build stuff that you claim to be.
Yeah.
And so now we have one.
So what's, I've been over to the museum a few times, and I think it's fascinating because there's so much Georgia history in there. What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite artifact in there, or
I got a couple. The cool musket that was Lafayette's, used in the Second Siege of Savannah. I was really involved when I was a kid saving the Fox Theater, and my mother found out they were going to implode it on a Saturday night after showing a movie and closing the building. They didn't want anybody to know. And she came home hysterical, saying I had to save the building. I was 15. I said, Mom, I can't even drive. And she said, well, your sister can, and all your friends, siblings can, so you better get down there fast. And we surrounded the theater. The police helped us close the streets, made a lot of noise. And Maynard Jackson, God bless him, he did not know this was going to happen. And he found out from the children of the city that the greatest theater in the nation was about to go up. And so he pulled the demolition permit. And subsequent meetings that we had, and he was the mayor then, and he left his sunglasses at my house one time, and I called him and said, I got your sunglasses, Maynard. And he said, oh, Rodney, you keep them. You just might need those someday. And they're in the museum in the Dobbs cabinet. Yeah, it's an artifact for him.
So I use that as a trick to make girls have to call me back. I leave stuff at their place, and then I'm like, hey, you got my sunglasses still?
Yeah.
Never works, but I try. So another thing I think was interesting is there's speaking of your parents, there's a Rodney Cook Senior Park coming. Tell us a little bit about that, its location, and kind of what's planned for it.
Sure. We built that in the 1890s. Livingston Mims was an ancestor. He was the 37th mayor. And it was Olmsted design in Vine City. It was the first integrated park in the city system. And very beautiful design, and a peace narrative that we are protecting to this day. Had Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois in larger-than-life statues arguing essentially over the Olmsted Oval how African Americans would integrate into white society, and having very differing views. And then in the middle, a peace column that had our co-founder, Georgia's co-founder, Chief Tomochichi, who befriended Oglethorpe when he landed in 1733. And both Dr. King and Ambassador Young have said and written that their ministries stand on the broad shoulders of Chief Tomochichi, Georgia's first peacemaker. He could have massacred those guys, and he chose not to. He really established a tradition that we have now had for almost 300 years of just getting along, the Atlanta way, all that kind of tradition that we alone possess in the world.
So tell us a little bit about who your dad was.
He was in the State House and the City Council from roughly 1960 to 1980. He was the first Republican elected in Georgia, and was part of that tradition. He essentially was tapped by Hartsfield to be his generation's leader, to assist, which he did with Ivan Allen, who was a little older than Dad, to get us through the turbulent 60s and 70s. And in the tradition of the Atlanta way, everybody in the leadership of the city, either primarily the black, white, and Jewish communities then, They all knew each other, and they just made sure this city remained harmonious. What really shocked the system, though, was Dr. King getting the Nobel Peace Prize. And he was in and out of our house a lot, and Dad was over there at their house on Sunset Avenue, which our foundation, by the way, has recently helped Bernice King sell to the National Park Service.
Oh, wow.
It fronts on this park. Dr. King gets the Nobel Peace Prize, the most highly branded prize in the world.
Yeah.
And what are we going to do? You know, we've never partied together. That changed everything. And so, huge party was arranged at the Dinkler Plaza Hotel, which was the grand hotel of the day. And Mr. Woodruff at Coca-Cola, who was helping underwrite it, he made sure that everybody knew that the Coca-Cola company was an international company and could move anywhere, and that he was really hopeful that this party would sell out, which it did in about a day.
Wow.
And Dad was one of the hosts, and it was, believe it or not, it was a strange thing for that to even be a thought.
Was it like a who's who of Atlanta at the time, though?
No, it was not.
A very small community, kind of?
Yeah, because it was a difficult thing to make that adjustment.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, we see it a little bit today, but I can't imagine what it was like back then.
Yeah.
So speaking to your work at the National Monuments Foundation, tell everybody a little bit about what y'all do, and specifically in Atlanta, kind of with your property. So you helped with, you know, Bernice King getting her property, I guess, sold to the National Parks Foundation. What else do y'all do around the city?
Well, we're rebuilding that park. I didn't finish telling you. Kasim Reed gave us 5 times the land adjacent to where the original park was. It's in Vine City. It's the major linchpin to rebuild the West End. And it's essentially almost right across from the World Congress Center. And it's been named after my dad. He's the one who compelled me to put it back, and said that a school was built in the green of the original park, and it got bigger and bigger, and it overtook the park in 1917. And he had always said, I should have put that park back for that community, and I didn't. And you go do it.
Yeah.
And so it's probably going to approach $100 million. It's got the peace narrative again, and because of the larger property that Kasim gave us, it's scaled up. So the monument to Chief Tomochichi is so tall and large that you can take an elevator to the top of it and have one of the most spectacular views. And Tomochichi himself, the statue on top, he's about 18 feet high.
Oh, no kidding.
It's massive, and he's completed. So we're cranking along. The park will be probably finished the end of this year, first quarter next year.
Wow. Wow, that's pretty quick.
Yeah. But other things that we do things all around the world. We do museums, public plazas, presidential memorials, a lot of restoration work, mostly in Europe, Scandinavia, Russia, some in California. We're very involved at Hearst Castle. I'm on that foundation board.
Just tell us a little bit about what the Hearst Foundation is, and the Hearst Castle, and kind of what y'all do.
Yeah, Hearst Castle Foundation exists to protect that property. W.R. Hearst, who
Is it
has
the biggest and most expensive piece of private property or residence in the country?
Well, Biltmore House might be a little bit more, but not much. The Vanderbilt Place in Asheville. Yeah. It's up there, and it's, you know, hundreds of thousands of acres all along Big Sur, and
if you've never seen it, Google it.
It's spectacular.
It's beautiful.
And the Neptune Pool is something that you feel like you're coming out of some kind of Olympus old-time movie. You know, it's this Greek temple with this beautiful pattern in the water, and it's 3,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. As far as you can see is Hearst land. And so the Hearst girls, primarily Ann Hearst and her sister Patty, organize it. Ann is in charge. She's the CEO. And our group exists to watch over the state of California, who actually technically owns the building compound at the top of the hill, which the family gave to California after W.R. died. And they thought it was a white elephant. And much like the Vanderbilts at the time, they opened that building. They were told the same thing, and Mr. Cecil, the Vanderbilt heir, said, "I am going to make this work." And it's a huge profit center. Well, so is Hearst Castle. But the family didn't want to bother with it. But they still own the ranch around it. And so we exist to make sure that California is paying attention and takes care of the furniture and the tapestries, all the textiles. It's got one of the greatest Etruscan and Greek ancient collections in the world. So that's what we do.
Was John Tyler born in Tennessee?
John Tyler, the president?
Yeah.
I think he was.
I just read a similar.
Or Virginia.
So if it wasn't John Tyler, I just read a similar story about one of our early presidents who, same thing, his family left the estate to the state, and Tennessee didn't really protect it as much, so the family had to come in and kind of be like, take control of it and get him where. I think the guy's buried in the Capitol in Nashville now.
Really?
Yeah. So whoever the history buff out there is going to find this.
I think you are right. I think there are 3 presidents from Tennessee: Andrew Jackson and him, and anyway, who's the other one? We'll look that up.
We'll figure it out. Okay. So another thing I thought was interesting that you've taught me is we have a piece of art in Georgia that was gifted to us by Prince Charles, correct?
Yes, we do.
And so, one, you have a relationship with Prince Charles, which I think is super cool.
Yeah.
So how did that relationship form? And then tell us a little bit about the gift and why it's Georgia and where it is.
Sure. I designed a museum, Hudson River School collection, painting collection in New York on the Hudson back in the 90s for Barbara Newington. Barbara's 95 now, still going strong. I saw her last weekend. She's my youngest daughter's godmother, and she's a $1 million donor to our park down here in Georgia. She lives in Greenwich, Connecticut, and she changed my life, having asked me to come up there to New York and design a museum for her. I was doing mostly houses before that, and the building was well received by the press at the time it was opening, and so the New York Times did a 2-page spread, very positive. Los Angeles Times, New Yorker, Pravda, Russia, a lot of things, but most notably the Financial Times of London did a really beautiful piece on it, and the Prince of Wales read it, and they tend to keep the newspaper out of his eyesight. They don't really want him reading anything.
Yeah. I can't blame him especially their journalism.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so he saw it and read it, and the palace wrote to us and said, "Can we send a representative to your upcoming opening?" So, yeah, how quickly can we say yes? And so they did, and that guy liked me and loved the building, and so they ultimately had me come see him, and he asked me to be his first American trustee for his Prince of Wales's Foundation for Architecture. And so I was to do that for 2 two-year terms, and he asked me to stay on for an additional 2 years, which of course I agreed, and yet I teased him a little bit, and I said, "Sir, I really work hard for you," and it was volunteer work. They would pay for your travel, but I said, "I really work hard for you," and he said, "Oh yes, Rodney, you work terribly hard, and I'm so appreciative." Is it all right to talk like this on this?
Yeah, totally.
And
Tug and I are much more offensive.
Okay, all right. And
if Prince Charles listens, I'll be thrilled.
Yeah, okay. I don't know that he knows I do this about him, but he said, "Very happy how much you work so hard for me. That's why I want you to stay on a little longer." And said, "Well, you have to answer one question for me. My family was on the second boat that took in Jamestown, which the first one was 1607, the second one was 1610. So clearly my ancestors had big problems with yours.
Yeah.
And so why is it you think that I work so hard for you?" And he said, "Rodney, I'm delighted you've gotten over it."
Has he?
The
question is, have they gotten over it?
I don't know. I don't know.
We won. So you were listening to Mind Your Business. a podcast where we talk about sports, music, and money, presented by SR Homes with communities throughout the metro Atlanta area. Visit them at srhomes.com. One thing I wanted to get out of you was kind of your relationship with Atlanta's art community and kind of the history of it. One thing I thought was fascinating, and it was a little remiss of me, I didn't know anything about the plane crash in the 60s, I believe, right? 60s or 70s. So tell us a little bit about that plane crash, why it was significant, and then kind of how the outside world views Atlanta's art culture.
Sure. It was probably as devastating for the city as being burned to the ground 100 years before. An entire generation of the primary arts community in this city at a time that the city was just exploding in scale. And, you know, we're the same age as San Francisco. And they have dozens of museums and opera houses and theaters and everything that San Francisco, we all know, possesses. They never had a disaster like this. Both cities burned to the ground. They were burned a little later than we were because of an earthquake. It set everything on fire. But they never had an entire generation go down in an airplane that devastated their arts community. And
They in France?
They were at Orly Field, and it was the Lead families that were trying to build the High Museum of Art.
Oh,
and
wow.
the Memorial Arts Center became the result of that, with Symphony Hall and the Atlanta College of Art and all of that complex. And it set us back tremendously. And we actually have a cenotaph at the Millennium Gate where you can see the names of the people that perished on that plane.
Is that outside?
Mm-hmm.
That's the monument right near the water?
Correct.
Cool. I'm telling you, if you have not been over there, it is I don't want to call it a hidden gem because it's very, very open and everyone's seen it, but it's awesome to go check out and go in and see the museum. Is it free?
It is not free.
It is not free, but it's not expensive. It's not like you're going to be paying, was it like 10 bucks, something like that?
And there are discounts, military discounts, student discounts, elderly discounts.
I mean, I don't know if you can get in another museum in Atlanta for $10.
No, you can't.
So.
And there's a lot of bang for your buck in there because we got a lot of virtual reality as well as old objects.
Oh, that's cool. So, well, actually, we'll get to the virtual reality in a second. Don't let me forget. One thing I wanted to ask you, you brought up Russia. And I've been looking, I've started studying a little bit about different cultures and governments, and I've realized that pretty much the more authoritarian they are, the more they shun the creative community. Why do you think the Russians, it seems to me, even the communists, when they came in, they appreciated their architecture, they protected it. Is that accurate? And do you think that's true in terms of kind of the broader scale of? Culturally,
they are a very sophisticated people, and they revere their culture, and absolutely that's true. The Soviet regime greatly helped in maintaining and restoring a huge amount of the Romanov patrimony. And today, of course, the Hermitage Museum in the Winter Palace is the largest museum in the world. I actually keynote spoke there for their conference last year on the 21st Century Museum conference, and the Millennium Gate was a keynote. There were three. The Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, which has all the Rembrandts, and the Louvre in Paris. So we were in really good company. But they were most interested in our virtual reality and what it can do to pull archives out of the basement that you never see. And you virtualize it all. You can put it in your own galleries that are virtualized and go through the whole thing as if it's real.
Yeah.
And stuff you haven't seen for 200, 300, 400 years in some of these collections.
And you can do this at the Millennium Gate Museum.
We
right?
have. We have an exhibition of that, of the Winston Churchill exhibition we did 2 or 3 years ago. So it's a permanent record, and you feel exactly like you're in that room as we had it hung 3 years ago. One thing I thought was interesting that you told me was that pretty much when you go to a museum, you're only seeing a small fraction of what they actually have. 2 to 3%. Yeah, 2 to 3%, that low. That low. And so the virtual reality allows you to kind of explore everything. do that 9 more times over and fill all your own rooms with your stuff in the basement, and you start to open up the entire patrimony of the world. Anybody who has, a mobile device, wherever mine went.
Oh, you can do it on cell phones
Yeah,
now?
sure.
Oh, that's
sure.
crazy.
And to think about if you're, 5,000 miles away from a museum that you might never go to, and you end up going there, and if you've really studied it, you know exactly where to go. You know the whole place as if you've been there 100 times.
Yeah. I still think there's something about when you see kind of pieces of history in person, though. Because it's like, you can be there and be like, Rembrandt, for example, like, he actually touched that canvas. Like, I think there's something that's, when you're in the presence of something great, it's more, meaningful.
It's better. It's
yeah,
always
better for sure, yeah. So speaking of being in the presence of something great, one of my favorite stories about you, I know you from kind of the business side of stuff, the cultural side of stuff, but the one time I've seen you outside of kind of work-related stuff was at Milltown Music Hall in Bremen, Georgia, for the Oak Ridge Boys concert. Right. I was in my cowboy hat and my cowboy boots, and you had cowboy boots too, I believe.
You look good.
And so what, again, I understand the connection, but tell everybody a little bit about your connection there, and then do you go to many concerts? Like, are you a big music guy or mostly visual art?
The latter, but my cousin is one of the partners. He's part of that Sewell clan that I was telling you about earlier.
Robin, your cousin?
Robin's my cousin, okay. Robin Worley. And
so for those of you who don't know, Milltown Music Hall, I don't want to call it a nonprofit, but you can't drink there. And they do a lot of work with the community, helping people get back on their feet that have had substance abuse problems. But the great part about the experience, it's just intimate. You get in, people usher you to your seat. And the acts they bring in, you wouldn't believe. It's unbelievable, the amount of people they're able to get down there. It's only, 45 minutes away?
Yeah.
So it's, it's a hidden gem. So what was the last concert you went to?
Oh, gosh. Oak Ridge Boys. It was...
that one or recently?
It was another one.
Okay.
He's got, who's he got? He's got somebody really good coming up he's trying to get.
They have Chubby Checker come in. It's amazing. The people they get.
I know. It's really good.
Yeah. And what I thought was interesting is I was like, how do you sell so many tickets down here? And they're like, oh, tour buses. The tour buses come right through and they know it's a good stop and they bring in people and it's, they're going to treat you right. Another thing I think is fascinating is kind of I call your family kind of a super family. So tell us a little bit about your wife and her background, her family's background and their contributions to Atlanta.
Sure, I married way above my head, and so Emily Robinson is my wife, and her family. She's 6th generation. I'm 5th, and so she grew up in Manhattan, Southern family, Atlanta family. Her grandfather was head of the First National Bank,
which is now SunTrust.
No, well, is it now? Well, all these bank mergers.
Yeah. SunTrust Robinson.
I thought it was
right?
Wachovia.
I think it was Wachovia. Yeah, but didn't Wachovia get bought out by SunTrust?
Whoever owns it.
Yeah, so you can go follow the mergers throughout.
Yeah, so, but historically, SunTrust, Trust Company of Georgia, had bounced off of First National anyway. So, anyway, it goes back to Captain James English, who was one of the guys with Alfred Austell who started the bank in the first place.
Oh, wow.
And then my wife's father, he went to Harvard and then to Wall Street and ended up running American Express for 20-some-odd years. So they have pretty much decamped, for the most part, to the Northeast. But my wife came down here to see her grandmother, Josephine, who was a cool lady, and I was introduced to her, and that was the end of that.
So another story I want you to share, and then I know you're busy, we'll let you get out of here. Bill Arnett, you've kind of been a champion of his, and he's, I think, in my opinion, since I've gotten to know him, kind of an unsung hero for Atlanta specifically, or just I don't know if people get the significance that art, music, and everything has in bringing the divide together. And so, will you tell us a little bit about Bill's work, back in the day, and how it's being recognized today?
Yeah, sure. And how much time we got?
As long as you want.
Okay. Bill Arnett is an American genius and guy who already had a thorough background in Asian jade, medieval tapestries, and
He's a fascinating life story.
yeah,
Unbelievable.
yeah, he knew all this stuff, mostly Renaissance era, and old masters, that kind of stuff. And he's driving through Alabama and western Georgia, going down to Florida, and he's seeing all of these extraordinary objects in people's yards. He says, that really looks like a de Kooning, that looks like a Twombly, that looks like a Rauschenberg. And ultimately, he's so curious, he stops and befriends some of these people, and what are you doing? And he's knowledgeable enough to know it's primitive, but it's not primitive. And so they're saying, well, I'm just making something for my mama. Anything I can find to make it from, that's what I do. And as he gets to be closer, he finds out that, no, this is my statement against Jim Crow laws and how we were treated in the early 20th century. And it gets a little bit more sophisticated, and yet they're untrained artists and you know how artists are. They have to make stuff, and they'll do it with anything they can find. And those three artists I mentioned earlier, Twombly, Rauschenberg, de Kooning, a lot of those guys, even Picasso, they were influenced by Southern African American artists, and they just went off to New York and Europe and made hundreds of millions of dollars, essentially copying these people.
Was Picasso rich in his lifetime?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because sometimes you look back, like Shakespeare wasn't necessarily the superstar that he is today.
Right.
So I've always wondered how that was in
You've
the art
heard the
world.
story of Picasso when he was at a very fine restaurant. And
If you're going to tell me a story about art, I'm here to listen to it.
They
So no,
didn't.
tell me.
He didn't have enough money on him. He didn't. Maybe forgot his wallet or something in a large party. No, it was a party next to his table.
He was pretty wild, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they didn't have enough money to pay the bill, and they were very upset. And so was the restaurant.
Yeah.
And so he's listening to this, and he does a little sketch on his napkin, hands it to the restaurant owner, and says, "Will this pay the bill?"
And I guess, yep.
Oh yeah.
So what did they do with it?
Oh, I'm sure. It's probably
If it's framed in the restaurant,
100,000 francs or something. Who knows?
Yeah. I hope that's in a museum and not like
yeah, it probably is.
photo.
I'm sure it paid the bill. So yeah, he was very successful in his lifetime. Anyway, Bill Arnett, he recognized that this was something quite new, and he also had a background in music, and so he knew that every great culture, if they had produced extraordinary music, there was always a great architectural and arts statement somewhere back there.
And he's a big blues lover, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he found it.
Yeah.
And then it develops, and he finds more of these guys, and he finds the Giesbin quilters because of his tapestry background, medieval tapestries, and those look like works of art themselves. And all these people were creating extraordinary works, in many cases a huge scale, that were remarkably similar, all descendants of slaves, all in the slave states, the former slave states, and none of them knew each other. And so that has never happened. Historically, that has never happened. And so Bill started launching into all of the museums that he could, particularly in the South, because it was Southern born, and he was kicked to the curb. And they said, "You're a crazy guy, and this is trash," and no. And Bill is not
And
to
anything
be
that's
deterred.
revolutionary, people are usually considered crazy.
Say again?
If you're revolutionary in something, if you're the first, people usually think you're nuts.
Yes, and Bill has a temperament that doesn't help it, because he knows he's that smart, and
Yeah, he doesn't. He gets frustrated that people don't get it. Yeah.
and he's very direct with the way he feels. And so I met him through some of his board members' friends in New York, and they said, "Your collection or your museum that you're building at the park, the Cook Park, would be perfect to house this collection, and you should get to know Bill." And I had met him. Everybody's met him, but I said, okay. And we hit it off immediately, and his warehouse over on the west side of the city is. You went over and saw it, didn't you?
Not yet. No.
Yeah,
And so I told him,
shocking. It's so big.
So I'll do the same thing I did to you. So he was like, hey, you want to come see the warehouse?
Yeah.
Or I'm gonna do the same thing to you I did to him. And I was like, look, Mr. Arnett, like, I'm just now getting exposed to art. I don't have the understanding of the history of it. I was like, I'd love to come see it, but I don't want to come off as ignorant or unappreciative. And he's like, no, not at all. Come on, like. And I was like, well, I got one question for you. Do you know who Banksy is, Greg Mike, or Dr. Dax? So I want to know if you know who Banksy, Greg Mike, or Dr. Dax are.
Well, Banksy's just done an exhibition at the Venice Biennale.
Was that the first time you heard of him? Because that was a huge publicity stuff.
No,
I mean, granted, everything.
No, but and he wasn't supposed to. He just set it up.
Yeah.
Like you go into the Metropolitan Museum and take your painting and hang it. Put a nail in, hang it up. My daughter, English, she is also an arts enthusiast, and she put together the Venice Biennale American Pavilion couple back when it was architecture on John Portman and his extraordinary work. And so she keeps me current on a lot of that. Have you met my daughter yet?
I have not.
She's a sweetheart, really cute. New York girl now. She's probably not coming home. But why do you ask about those particular artists?
Well, Banksy's the one who kind of turned me on the street. So that's where I first got exposed to.
Do you know the artist?
I don't know him.
Okay.
No. So it's come out. It's a. I forget the band's name, but basically they've figured out who Banksy actually is, and he's a touring musician. And because you can look at where his paintings pop up, and typically it follows where the band's touring. But it's a huge collaboration, obviously, because they have to do it in secret when they do all their paintings. But Greg Mike's an Atlanta street artist. I don't know much about his background other than he's blown up. He's starting to make good money doing it. And then my personal favorite that I think is completely under-recognized in Atlanta is Dr. Dax. And so this is a guy that comes from, and this is something I thought was fascinating about speaking with Bill, is I think Atlanta is kind of going through the same thing with hip-hop and kind of the urban culture again that it did 30 years ago, where necessarily the white community isn't embracing the magic that's being created by our African American community, which right now is hip hop and all this stuff. So Dax is actually part of the Dungeon family, which is Outkast, Goody Mob, the Dungeon family, which are kind of the guys who gave, there were kind of two camps in the 90s who gave rise to our powerful hip hop scene today. Mm-hmm. And Dax was the visual artist. And so you can go see his work all around town, a lot of it in Little 5 Points, but I don't want to describe it because artists are very particular about it, but very colorful, and I think history will be very good to Dr. Dax. And
cool.
But he's.
Do you know the Migos?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I don't want to say personally, but yeah, I've met him a few times.
And who's the other group that was at our?
2 Chainz and Migos.
Yeah,
2 Chainz and Migos came to the.
They had a music video at our building that is hilarious.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Is that where they did Ric Flair Drip?
90, 100 million hits on there, and they had chandeliers and they had smoke coming out, and the museum, the monument looked great. They had a symphony orchestra playing while they were up on the top terrace singing, and it was maybe 10 degrees, and so that poor symphony, because they couldn't dress like it was 10 degrees.
So I bet 2 Chainz actually appreciated being in the museum.
Oh yeah, they loved it.
Whereas the Migos, I wouldn't be surprised if they were too high to know where they were. The hip hop guys, it's legal in their world.
Yeah.
So that's kind of all we got for you. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on?
Oh yeah, I got to finish with Bill, and so he persisted and persisted, and I took my mother, Betty Jo Trewick. She did the Tully Smith House restoration at Atlanta History Center at the Swan House, and so she knows a lot about textiles and 19th century primitive work. And I took her to Bill's warehouse, and she said, honey, I don't know what this is. I have never seen anything like it, and it is not folk, it's not primitive, it's not outsider. This is entirely new. Bill is on to something. You take care of Bill Arnett. And so we helped him, and certainly his family did too, but he ends up with a blockbuster exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art the world's most powerful museum, arguably. And his works are hanging with de Kooning and Rauschenberg and Twombly, and side by side.
Wow.
And you know, those are $100 million paintings, and the giant banner is hanging from the Metropolitan arches on the Fifth Avenue front.
Probably the most expensive real estate in the country.
Yeah, and Bill, he has prevailed.
I wonder what they would, I mean, I know they won't sell it, but I wonder what they would sell that for. If Coca-Cola wanted to, you know, put up an ad up there on Fifth Ave. You think it's over $1 billion worth of advertising right there?
Oh, easily.
Yeah?
Easily.
That would be nuts. So actually, we'll leave it with this. In light of the plane crash in the 60s and the growth you've seen since then in Atlanta, how do you feel about Atlanta's art community going forward?
It's picking up because the city's so big now. I mean, you know, the population of the city at the time of the Paris plane crash was relatively tiny. You know, we were under 1 million people, and now we're just under 7. So we've had a huge infusion of people, and the talent, in the arts, and every facet of it. And it's cool to be a music center. It's cool to be an art center. And we're trying to do our part with the architectural side of it, because most of the architectural statements here are still modern, and you know, you don't go to Paris or Tokyo or Moscow to see the Georgia World Congress Center. You go to see cathedrals and plazas and squares and great museums, and that's what we do, and that's what we're going to continue to do as long as I can stand up.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for your history and contributions to, you know, preserving Atlanta's, you know, art community and introducing me to people like Bill and stuff like that. I appreciate everything you've done.
Oh, sure. Thanks for having me over.
How do we? So I know you're not a huge social media guy. How do we find y'all on social media?
Hey, Mac, how do we do that?
At the NMF.
At the NMF, and then obviously you can Google National Monuments Foundation. It'll shoot right to their homepage. Rodney, thanks again.
Sure. Enjoyed it.
Thanks.
At SR Homes, our end goal is to create a home that's unique to you, one that you and your family will enjoy for years to come. With over 4 decades of home building experience, SR Homes has become a top home builder in Atlanta, offering a variety of communities in the most sought-after locations. Locally owned and operated, SR Homes is a builder focused on you. For more information, visit us at srhomes.com.